Well, welcome everyone to the Insurance Perspectives podcast. Today, we're continuing our 5-episode series on conversations with former captive insurance agents. On today's show, we have Ron Keats of Keats Insurance Agency. For folks that haven't encountered Ron before, I'm going to give you a rundown of some really impressive stats and background on Ron. He is well respected in our industry with over 30 years of experience as an insurance professional. He started his agency in 1993, and I'm going to do all of us the favor in not pointing out how old I was in 1993. In his first full year, his agency reached the highest level of accomplishment within his primary insurance carrier. And Ron and his team sustained that success, hitting that level every year for 20 years in a row. That achievement secured his eligibility and induction into the Nationwide Insurance Hall of Fame. And if my research is correct, that made Ron the first agent to ever achieve that in the company's 100-year history. Outside of the insurance space, Ron is big on serving in the community and is active with the Lustgarten Foundation, the Scleroderma Foundation, Real Men Wear Pink for American Cancer Society, and does volunteer work at Island Harvest and Long Island Cares. I could not be more excited to have this conversation with Ron. The Keats Insurance Agency is a well-known agency within our space, especially among HawkSoft agencies. Our histories tie together, which I'm sure we'll discuss as we go through this. But, today we have a great honor of having Ron with us. So thank you for joining us today, Ron. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day.
Happy to be here, Kenny. Absolutely. Whatever I can do for HawkSoft, for sure. We love you guys.
Oh, thank you so much for that.
We do.
I'm going to dive right in, and people might have been able to piece it together from the introduction, but I want to start on the captive agent side. So we're going to go back just a few years. How long were you a captive agent?
Well, I started in the captive agency system when I was very young. I actually started with a true captive insurance carrier, State Farm. And I worked with an agent there and learned the business with that fellow. And but eventually I found Nationwide, and Nationwide worked as my first captive for all the right reasons. The main one being is it wasn't, in my opinion, a true captive. It was a hybrid captive. And so we have been acting hybrid in a hybrid system since the beginning. So maybe my transition might have been a little different than it was for others. But yeah, so it was 1993.
1993. Probably a great year for the Bulls. I think you can pick any year in the 90s for the Bulls and be like, that was a great year for them. When you say a hybrid captive agent, what does that mean for our listeners?
Well, when we think about State Farm as a carrier, if something doesn't fit into State Farm's box, well, then the agent doesn't have an option to write it other than an assigned risk on the personal line side or New York property, fair plan. But outside of that, it is what it is. With Nationwide, their program was different. They had the ability to write insurance with a couple other personal lines carriers. And on the commercial side, they gave you the ability to write with other carriers if it didn't work in the Nationwide program. So we worked with other carriers using back then general agents, MGAs, and on the personal line side through Nationwide's own independent agency resource. So that's how we did a captive. Now, of course, the commissions were cut in half if we wrote it with another carrier, and on the commercial side, if it didn't fit. It had to not fit with Nationwide for us to write it on the outside, but that was the beginning. As very few in my very early years, it started to transition relatively quickly, where Nationwide would give us more authority because there were certain homeowner moratoriums. So they would give us authority to get appointments with homeowners carriers. So we had that advantage. On the commercial side, they were very quick to allow us to do more business on the outside than we were. So, so that's what I mean by a hybrid. We didn't have to always have everything get into the nationwide system.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, Thank you for that explanation. That kind of fills a lot of gaps for me. I always make the observation that I'm a rarity at HawkSoft. I don't have an insurance background, and so I get to ask those questions to folks.
Sure, keep it coming.
Ron, when did you make the switch to being independent then?
You know, we were very fortunate. Our agency was always recognized by Nationwide. So we had developed early on in my career a relationship with leadership at Nationwide. And so I was able to have this direct line to our leadership at Nationwide. And so we would have a lot of discussions. And, you know, I was very fortunate to be in the room where it happens, if you will. And reference to Hamilton, if that's okay with you. I happen to be a Broadway fan. But, but you know, I was in the negotiations over many years to try to get us more opportunities and to be able to have appointments. And let's just say, for interest of time, that somewhere in the around 2000 and in the mid 2000s, we had gotten the okay to get our independence on commercial. And the argument was, if Nationwide wanted to grow their in the commercial side, we needed to be true commercial agents. And you can't be a commercial agent if you don't have choices. And so they understood that. And it took a long time for them to accept that. But they did. And they gave us our independence first on commercial. Then came the hard part, right? Then we realized, hey, this is working. Some of us are becoming better commercial agents, and so is Nationwide because of it. So as we're able to build our house, they were able to build theirs even bigger. It worked. Well, now we wanted to transition that to the personal line space, and that was a challenge. And that took many, many years. But again, my good fortune in being able to be at the table for the discussions, not for me, but for everybody, right? With the respect I had for them, the respect they had for us, we were able to work out a deal that allowed us to finally break off and become fully independent, all of the agents at Nationwide, and that we concluded in 2020.
And this is where our paths intersect. I was racing through my head to find the right lyric, and it just didn't come to me. But this is where my history with HawkSoft and your history with Nationwide intersect, because I was hired at HawkSoft in 2015 when we were doing a build up to support Nationwide's embrace of independence on the commercial and personal lines avenue, which I always say I'm grateful for. It did take a number of years to reach kind of the ultimate goal of that project. But were it not for that, I don't think I would have had a position at HawkSoft to like even apply for, because they were growing the product support team so much at that point that they were like, oh, we'll take this kid with no background in insurance. And
Well,
so
I'm glad
that's,
we were able to facilitate that for you.
yeah, thank you so much, Ron. It does sound like you had a positive experience as a captive agent, and I'd love to know what did you like about being captive?
The captive system has a lot of things that are good. So for a new agent, it's financing, it's education, it's guidance, it's structure, it's the potential of having good relationships with underwriters. Not that that doesn't exist on the independent side, but it's a little bit tighter knit, right? So that mattered also. So the captive system has a lot of advantages, and I think it was in its day a good thing for a new agent. I wasn't really a new agent, So it may not have been the best thing for me to do, but I have no regret that I did, because what Nationwide did for me, I'm forever grateful. And they were good to me. I was good to them. That's wonderful. On the other side of it is, well, what's wrong with the captive system? And what's what I find, and now I look at it as it's not right for an agent to sell one company. We can't do our job if we're selling one company. It means we're favoring somebody. Now, Nationwide's claims were really super good and strong. Our relationship with the company can move things along and help people like we can't on the independent side. There were advantages, and I believe there were advantages for my clients. But today, it's different. You have to have choice. The consumer deserves choice. The consumer needs choice. The agents need choice. And that doesn't exist in a captive environment. I've got plenty of State Farm friends. I love them dearly. And I just, I mean, it's a great company. Thank God it's a great company, right? But for the rest of us, I think that this independent system is the right system for who it matters most to, and that's the consumer, that's the business owner, that is the homeowner.
Yeah, absolutely. And the market in recent years has been shifting so much, state dependent, but there's been regions that have just seen such volatility in carrier availability and coverage availability that if you're an agent locked down to one particular carrier, that does limit how you can help your clients. And so I think a lot of people can appreciate that perspective, that being able to open up and be on the insured side, be on the client side in helping them pick, gives a little bit more freedom.
It's too easy to say that insurance is a commodity, because it
Mm-hmm.
truly isn't.
Mm-hmm.
If every individual's needs are different. A house is not a house not a house.
Mm-hmm.
There are differences. There are differences in weaknesses. There are differences in community or where you live relative to the environment.
Mm-hmm.
But you're so right. I mean, imagine being a coastal area and only having one company.
Yeah.
Well, what about the companies that cover the coasts and so on? And we could talk forever on this kind of a topic, and we won't waste too much time on it. But to recognize that, yes, I think the independent agency system is what's best for the consumer. I'll leave it at that.
The
Yeah.
perfect summation. And it gives us a chance to start talking about your experience in the independent space. Because it sounds like it was a gradual process, and there's been a lot of learning along the way. And so I'd like to start with asking you, what was the hardest thing you had to do when you transitioned to the independent world fully?
Well, I think preparation is the key to anything, right? Any
Mm-hmm.
endeavor where change is to take place, especially enormous change, which going from a captive to an independent is. Being prepared will mitigate the difficulties and can help you create a seamless transition. Advice that I would give any agent, whether you're going from captive to independent or you're an agent, is to participate in think tanks, in groups. Um, you know, we had, it's over 20 years that I've spent time with a series of agents, meeting with them, sharing ideas, sharing concepts, sharing vendors, and learning. And having them work together with me on this is what made the transition so easy for us. It was a non-event for us. But I know that's not normal because people don't have the facilities that we happen to have. And spending all these years working, it happens to be called a CEO group. And we were formalized probably 15, 16 years ago. but we had worked together for many years before that too. So yeah, it's learning from one another. I think that'll help anyone get through this process.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
How did you initially find that group? Was it a Rotary? Was it a state conference? How did you initially build that group of people that you felt comfortable sharing these topics with?
I was a new agent. I think I was two years into the program, and having had the good fortune of achieving the Pinnacle Conference in my first year, and again my second year, like somehow the company put me into this group of all the bigwigs, the guys that I would look up to, right? And they put us all together with a business consultant, and that's really where it started. So I got to know these guys, and I had already looked up to them, and now I'm talking to them about how they do business, and I just found it to be invaluable. And that eventually became where a few of them plus who we met from other conferences, people we knew were successful, people we were watching as they were doing well and wondering how are they doing this, and people that we found we could respect, and we put it together, and eventually we got a coach who to manage us, right?
Yeah.
Because most of us are all A-type personalities. I mean,
Sure.
you put us in a room, herding cats is like so. Anyways, we found someone who was excellent at herding cats, and she manages to keep us in place, and she still does today. So yeah, it was about grabbing people that you respect, but in this industry, but not from my neighborhood or not from
Sure.
New York even. These are
Yeah.
agents from all different parts of the country.
Yeah. So if a captive agent is listening to this and trying to think about forming that type of support system, maybe the words of encouragement are seek out the people you respect and try to get in a room with them, ask them for help. Because in my experience, the worst thing that can happen is they'll say, hey, I'm busy. And it's like, okay, I respect that. But more often than not, especially in this industry, I feel like people are willing to say, oh yeah, let's sit down, let's grab coffee, let's have a drink, and talk about this. I'll tell you how I did it.
Well, no doubt. And I think that you got two things. You got to go into this, number one, committed.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, you got to give more than you get. But the thing is that you get more than you give when you give more than you get.
Sure.
It's the craziest thing, but that's the way it works. And it's just like participating in a networking group, right? So you've heard of BNIs, and in BNI groups, the idea is you got to come in and bring a certain amount of referrals to the others. Well, nothing's better than an insurance guy being in a BNI because everybody needs the insurance. Not everybody needs a mortgage. Not everybody needs a state attorney. Not everybody needs, this particular type of business. But everyone needs insurance. So it's easy for us to get, but we need to know how to give. And that is the same thing with your group. You've got to come in giving. You have to be an open book, and you have to trust the folks you're with. And we did, and it made all the difference in our careers for sure.
That's fantastic. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
So then you had the personal line side, you're doing well with Nationwide. Nationwide gave you a lot of freedom and latitude with the commercial side to grow that. But when you went independent, what strategies did you utilize to get and establish carrier appointments in the beginning? Maybe particular to the personal line side because you hadn't had that freedom on the equal to the commercial side.
The first thing is you have to have a story, right? So what's in that story? What are your values? What value do you bring that insurance company? Okay. I wrote a lot of policies last year. Well, that doesn't really say anything. So what are your core values? What are your disciplines? Have a value proposition and have it front and center. It needs to know that you know how to underwrite. They need to know that you care about what you write. They need to know that you are working on growth. They want to know, how are you working on growth? The words that I'm going to grow this year. Well, how you're going to grow this year.
Yeah.
They want to know, and some of the hows are, well, my plan for over the next 5 years is I'm going to hire 3 people this year, 2 of them in sales, 1 in service. Next year, I'm going to pick up 3 more service people because I will have grown my business by this much. You need a business plan.
Yeah.
Everyone should have a business plan. Every year you modify it, and it should go out at least for 5 years at least, I would say. But I believe when you go to a carrier and you talk to them about your value prop, that's when they see you're different than everybody else. If you're just a lot of hot air,
Sure.
yeah. So it also helped that we had already built up a relatively large agency. So going in and showing, hey, we got good loss ratios. Hey, we've grown this much each year over X, so they can see our history. So
Yeah.
you do want to be able to show a good history, but what's your plans for tomorrow? You may not have had the opportunity to have that history. Okay,
Yeah.
well, how are you going to get there?
Yeah.
Right?
That makes total sense. And I think that illustrates that you have to, as you said, you have to be able to go beyond, I can sell insurance. You have to be able to maybe demonstrate, I can think about the strategies that I need to employ to sell more insurance, to help more people, to sustain this. Because I imagine a carrier doesn't want someone who's going to have like a huge loss ratio coming in being like, I'm going to get you all the new business in the world. I'm not going to staff my support team to make sure you retain it, but I'll get you those new sales. So it sounds like someone can really stand out when they're approaching carriers by taking that time, as you mentioned earlier, to prepare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So then what misconceptions did you have about being fully independent? Were there any beliefs that you developed while you were a captive that you had to unlearn?
I guess I would have anticipated a little bit more love, maybe a little bit more spirit, more engagement with their marketing folks. Um, I think I think COVID obviously had an impact. If you knew on the personal line side anyway, we started in 2020, so we were right there in the thick of it. So. But I still would have anticipated more phone calls coming in offering ways to help us put more business with them, more strategies. Maybe I would have expected more from the carriers than we had actually had gotten. I guess I was accustomed to, having a single carrier as a captive, always looking for ways to help you grow.
Yeah.
But the other, I didn't find that. So instead, we felt we had to show them
Sure.
what we can do. And we showed that appreciation by bringing more than just applications to the table. When you have disciplines and you have expertise and you've got your finger on the pulse of what's going on out there, I think that we have a lot to offer the carrier. And
Yeah.
sometimes you need to be able to show that. So,
Yeah. So you would be proactive in engaging the carrier and maybe illustrating to them the success you're having, maybe making sure it wasn't something that they would, maybe a territory rep would accidentally stumble on and be like, oh, Keats Insurance Agency is doing really well. You would maybe make it very front and center to them.
no, I don't think so. I don't think it was about boastfulness in any way.
Sure.
I think it was a matter of the opportunity to say, hey, you've turned off the lever for this section of clients when it actually is resulting in this, but you're seeing it like this. It's strategies. And the
Sure.
problem in the independent, see, on the captive side, when we could see opportunity for the carrier, we would not just speak to our manager or the AVP or the RVP. We would actually have communication with leadership. And
Gotcha.
we'd be able to share ideas and things that can help them do better at what they're doing and score more business, the kind of business that they want and why. I think on the independent side, that there's a big gap
Yeah.
from your marketing rep to your leadership. There's an enormous gap, and what we found where we didn't have there's always gaps, but when we started to engage nationwide as a carrier, we found that it's like playing telephone. So I'll tell my manager this, and by the time it gets to his AVP, it sounds like this, and by the time it gets to the RVP, it's this, and then when it gets to this, it's totally different, and it's not what we had recommended.
Yeah.
So what we managed to do as a captive is we were able to bring your better brains, for what it's worth, your agents who really were into helping the company because you knew in the
Yeah.
big picture it would help you. We were able to bring that to committees and to
Hmm.
meetings and really open it up. And on the independent side, you don't see as much of that. It's
Gotcha.
just too much gap.
Yeah.
And I think that the companies miss out on opportunities because of those gaps.
Gotcha. Well, hopefully some of our listeners who are on the carrier side tune into that, because you are not the first independent agent that has kind of voiced this stressor to me. And I think it is one of those things where, you know, speaking on the HawkSoft side, we spend a lot of our time trying to proactively listen to our agency partners, because you're in the trenches, you're doing the work.
Right.
Your approach to the strategy is informed by real on the ground intel. And anytime we've ever had periods of a great distance between ourselves and our customers, it's resulted in less than well received features and whatnot. And so I think that I completely agree with you that there can be those gaps between the independent agency channel and carriers that, in their defense, they have a million things to think about. But if ultimately their purpose is to deliver coverage of risk to an insured, the workforce that's on the ground doing that, the independent agents, it probably is really good to kind of tune in and listen.
When our goals are in sync, in other words, carrier to the independent agent, when our goals are in sync, there's so much more we can do together than we could ever do independently of each other. And so, yeah, you're right on.
So then, going on 4 years fully independent at the agency, and I imagine that CEO group that you helped coalesce together as a support group has been very helpful. Outside of that group as well, what other resources have you utilized to aid in more fully leaning into the independent side?
I think that organizations like the Big I can really help, and the PIE too. We're members of both, of course, and I think that connecting with an industry group is it's not an option.
Mm-hmm.
It's a must do.
Mm.
Everyone needs to be involved. The problem is time. So when you're an insurance agent, when you own an agency, you're being pulled in a million directions, right? So until you can scale up where you've got, a manager, an office manager, or then now you have a service manager, then you have a sales manager, and then you have operations guy, and then you have this and you have this. Well, until you can scale up, you're really struggling to find time. So the most important thing, and I'm not telling something new to the agents that might be listening in, but you need to delegate
Mm.
because it's the old adage, don't work in your business, work on your business.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a long time to establish that fully.
Mm-hmm.
And today that's all I do, right? So I'm not working in my business in any way. I strictly work on the business.
Yeah.
And when you can get to that point, or somehow find a way to grab that, you can spend more time learning from places like the Big I, taking
Mm.
advantage of their resources, the PIA. They have resources that can answer your questions quickly or
Mm-hmm.
help guide you in this direction, or whether it's social media or it's marketing of some type or it's where to go for carriers. Use the Big I and the organizations to help yourself move forward. It will help though when you can start delegating. And probably the best thing I could say to most of the newer agents or people who are thinking of going from captive to independent is try to find your way to separate the two.
Yeah.
working in your business. You can't sell insurance and build your business. You can't. So even though you may be the best salesperson, you
Yeah.
still can't do it. You got to hire salespeople. And if there was one thing I learned, even when I worked for the guy at State Farm, every time we hired another employee, we grew. Hired employee, we grew. Hired employee, we grew. So I guess take it on faith that by building your business, both with clients and with staff, allows you to become a bigger and better business.
The question that pops into my head with that is, I'm the kind of person that struggles to say no to a task or to delegate. It's one of the things I struggle with, because I'm the type of person that's just like, oh, there's a problem, let's fix it, and I'll jump in. If someone they just went independent, they're growing their scratch agency, and they're listening to this and they're just like, what do I put down first? What is the thing? Is it the sales? Should they seek out a producer? What would you recommend as like, here's your first step in taking time back for yourself to work on the business?
They need to have a right-hand person. When you're starting out, generally you have someone who's answering the phone and answering general questions and whatnot. Sometimes that individual can grow up and be someone more than that for you. But I think that, obviously there's that person. There may be a second, but then immediately you need a producer. And then you need another producer. Now, when you have a couple producers, your next person is a right-hand person, not man. Someone who takes all those things off your plate, whether it's the banking, it's it's communications. I think obviously you need the right first staff, second staff, but then you have to start organizing yourself as a business.
Yeah.
And you need people handling a lot of the stuff that you shouldn't be touching. You shouldn't be looking at commissions and oh gosh, I don't know. We could talk about this for hours, so
Yeah.
I don't want to bore you with it. But my point would be stepping away from some of the mundane tasks.
Sure.
You continue to sell to some degree. But if you're really good at what you do, your handoff, it's just what you want your producers to be doing. They bring the fact that, hey, I have Joe. Joe is my right hand. Joe knows this stuff as well as I do or better. And Joe will be handling all of your service going forward. So I want you to meet Joe.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you set that up in every sale, then you're not getting those phone calls. You may get some, but you're not going to get them all. And I think that's the problem with the agents is we're great and we're wonderful and we know everything. Well, and then when they have something come to mind, oh my God, how am I going to pay this bill? I can't speak to anybody but Ron.
Yeah.
Doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I think that's the best advice I could give is immediately you tell them about who's handling their service.
Gotcha.
Best thing I could tell you to do.
This has been a fantastic conversation, and I could extend this for hours, but I know you have an agency to work on, maybe not directly in, but I know you're a very present person. Any last advice to leave a listener with? Anything that we haven't covered yet that you think someone should know when they're making this transition?
I think that the most important thing to remember is not a one of us have a monopoly on brains. And with that said, find your people and share, as I said before, work together, share your vendors, get ideas, but don't try to do it alone. Okay? That's the best advice that I could possibly pass on.
I love that. Thank you so much, Ron, for sitting down with us, talking to us about your journey from being a super successful captive agent to being a super successful independent agent. I know you did not do it alone. You did it with a group of people that could support you. And so I really appreciate you passing that forward and sharing that advice with our listeners. Thank you for watching today's episode. Click the video description below to learn more about our guests. and to view the latest podcast episode as well as other content from HawkSoft. We appreciate you watching and hope you join us next time on the Insurance Perspectives podcast. Thank you.